What's up, guys? I'm Ryan Roberts. Welcome into tonight's At Large Bid Bearcats podcast, brought to you, as always, by Riverfront U. Tonight, we are joined by one half of the Hall of Fame broadcast Bearcats team, the one and only Jim Kelly Jr.
Hey Ryan, how are you?
Good, good. How are you? You had a busy 2 weeks being out in Provo and then being out in California. How were your trips?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate that I have a brother-in-law that lives out in the wine country. He lives in actually Calistoga, California. So being that I was 2/3 of the way across the country, decided to stay in Salt Lake City the night after the game in Provo, and then headed out to the Napa Valley there on Saturday. And it was a really nice getaway. Weather was beautiful. It was 80 and sunny, no humidity, and drank a little wine and just ate some good food. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you get to sightsee at all when you were out in Provo for the BYU game?
Yeah, so I was a little bit kind of, I don't know what the word would be, tied to the chair, so to speak. We were in Salt Lake, and the team stayed in Salt Lake. So there's one huge hotel. It's a Marriott in Provo, right? Mm-hmm. And the last time when Cincinnati in 2015, when the Bearcats played there, that's where they stayed. Well, that's where I assumed they would stay. Well, BYU has taken that hotel over the night before game. So there's no other hotels that can handle a team with all the meal, the meal prep and all the stuff that goes along with it. So they had to stay about roughly 45 miles away, rather, in Salt Lake City. And on a Friday night game, Friday afternoon, driving to the stadium, even though it's only 45 miles, it took us an hour and 20 minutes to get there with a police escort. So, but all in all, I enjoyed Salt Lake, got out and did a lot of walking, and it's a beautiful city. It's very clean. I'm sure exactly what they call it. The temple where the Mormons, the Mormon church is based, is right there in downtown Salt Lake City, but it's totally under construction, scaffolding all the way around. So I had toured it once before, but I tried to go up there to look at it again and couldn't get in there. So anyway, it's a nice trip. It's a little different than what we see in the Midwest here.
Right. Yeah. That was one of the road trips I wanted to make this year. I'll be at Oklahoma State in a couple weeks, but I really wanted to go to BYU, but I was in Destin that week. So instead of being in the mountains,
that's not a bad place to be either. Yeah. So, but you think about the future and who knows what the schedule is going to bring next year. But you're going to get to see along the way some nice places. Provo, certainly. I think we'll be back there sometime. But now Boulder, Colorado. I'd mentioned Salt Lake City. That's where Utah is, and they're going to be in the league starting next year. Not to mention Phoenix, which just has a host of different things, and Tucson. And, that doesn't even include the cities that we don't get to go to this year of the teams that are in the league, places like Lubbock, Texas. Trying to think who else I would be missing. I guess that's about it. Looking forward to going to Oklahoma State, though. I'm glad you'll be out there. Yeah.
So let's just jump right into things. Bearcats are 2-3 heading into week 6 off the bye week. Just what's your overall outlook on the first 5 weeks from the vantage point you've had?
Yeah, certainly there's some good things. I think if all of us did this in our heads, if not on paper, we looked at the schedule and we figured out which games Cincinnati should win and maybe which ones they wouldn't win. And there's probably a whole bunch of us that had them at 3-2 this time of the year. There's probably a good number that had them at 2-3. But honestly, I don't think the way the games have come out that's the way people would have picked them. Certainly, a whole lot of folks would have said Pittsburgh was a loss, as we found out. I think the Bearcats played very, very well there, and Pittsburgh's maybe not as good as everybody thought. Then, of course, you get to the Miami game. And that's one that you should have won that you didn't.
Right.
And then quite honestly, you move on to the next two. And they're both games that you certainly could have won. Oklahoma, a little bit more formidable than BYU, but secondly, you were at home for Oklahoma, on the road for BYU, but both those games are winnable. So if you look at it that way, you would say, okay, we were in every game. We should be in every game the rest of the year. However, there's some recurring things that are happening here that cause you concern. The reason you lost the Miami game, not necessarily the blocked field goal, but your inability to score in the red zone, that carried over to the Oklahoma game, that carried over to the BYU game. And then some other things as well, not being able to pick up third and short, 4th and 1, giving up third and longs defensively, maybe stopping everybody on 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, or 4th and 1, but giving up, and particularly a very, very critical 3rd and 19 a while back against the Red Hawks. One that literally was I think one of the turning points of the game. So there's certainly some things to correct, and quite honestly, maybe the open week came at the right spot, and having 2 weeks to correct those things and work on those things. Not like they weren't working on them, particularly the red zone, but at the same time, we have an open week here. Everybody gets a little bit more relaxed, and they can, work on those things that have been lacking in those 3 straight losses that they've had.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the red zone issues is that this is a team that has moved the ball very well. I believe they have the number 3 offense in the Big 12 in total yardage. Have had multiple guys rush for over 100 yards. Have had, Xavier Henderson. He's the 2nd leading receiver in the Big 12. What do you think is contributing to these red zone issues? Is it play calling? Is it a lack of execution? Is it just things that other teams are scheming? What have you seen from the press box?
Yeah, so that's a good question. But you're absolutely right. If you look at the offensive statistics, they're literally top 20 in the nation in both passing and rushing. Not in passing, in rushing, but in total offense and rushing. And actually they're top 20 in the nation in defense as well. But what do I attribute it to? So when you get inside the 20, then, as Coach Satterfield likes to call it, what he calls the tight red zone, which is inside the 10, everything is a little bit, it's a little bit smaller. Your windows of opportunities, you don't have those wide spaces that maybe you even have from the 20. And I'm going to use the BYU game as a great example. And one wasn't a red zone, but it's kind of a microcosm of what's gone on. And that was a 4th and 1, and they called a play action pass, brought to Peyton Singletary across, and Emory Jones kind of threw the ball really hard to him. Was it catchable? Yes. Was it a tough catch? Very much so. And they were unable to convert there. Now, same situation down in the red zone. Corey Kiner, were kind of running the same type of route. Play action, got out into the right flat, and the ball was a little bit high. So let's put the ball up here, okay?
Yeah.
And not that Corey couldn't have caught that, but at the same time, not the easiest catch in the world when you're running sideways. Been there, done that one. You make the catch 9 out of 10 times, and Corey dropped it. And you were there at the press conference on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. Emory took, the blame on both those throws, but he also said Peyton would take the blame for not catching it, and that Corey would take the blame for not catching it. But those are the little things, and they really are just a hair off. But you're 5 games into the season. You guys have been working together, since June, but since they started, getting into fall camp there at Camp Higher Ground, probably early August, they've been running those plays, and they should be connecting on them. And it's just killing them. It's little things like that, little penalties at wrong times that just get them against the chains, instead of 2nd and 3, now you're looking at 2nd and 8, and you miss a pass, and now you're at 3rd and 8 and you can't convert, those kind of things. So it's just little things. I mean, I feel really good. I mean, this offense is moving the ball up and down the field, but they just can't get the ball in the end zone, and that's what's killing them right now.
Yeah, and I think one of the for Cincinnati fans, I would say one of the frustrating things and parts of that is that we've seen this team score in multiple ways. They've had 4 and 5 play drives where they're scoring in, a minute. And then we've seen them at Pitt, 17 play drive, and they score in an 8-minute time frame. So, I believe they're 3rd in the country in time of possession, and they lead actually they're 5th in the country, I'm sorry, in time of possession. So they're controlling the game. They're just not being able to get points when it matters. I did want to ask you, so we've seen Emory Jones kind of be up and down through these first 5 weeks.
Right.
Something that kind of crossed my mind is this is a group of, I asked Scott Satterfield a couple weeks ago how he manages that depth between running back and wide receiver. And the reason I asked that is because take the BYU game, for example. On that pick 6, it's a bad read. He's thinking his wide receiver is doing one thing. The receiver cuts his route off, throws it right to the BYU defender. Do you think with them only having one guy in Xavier Henderson and rotating so many other guys maybe is causing, timing issues with that group? Or is it just, a lack of execution at times on Emory's part?
No, honestly, I think it's lack of execution. I mean, if you look at the way those guys are getting snaps in there, D. Wiggins is getting a lot. Braden Smith is getting a lot. They're getting their guys in there. Ollie got some good playing time out at BYU. So they're getting 4 and 5 guys in there, and they've been playing together long enough that timing should be there. I honestly think it was a bad read. However, I hate to say this, but I've been there when you're coming in as a receiver and you're thinking, okay, if I keep going, I'm running into traffic. So you cut the route off and you stop. Well, what you don't realize is the quarterback's already in motion. And, he's following through with that throw. And it's not like, you can stop a throw that's here. That ball's going to go. And that's what did him in. There was a little bit of a slip on the turf as well. That's the same thing that happened in the overtime loss to Miami. Again, I don't think Cincinnati, just watching the body language, I think they felt like they were not going to score on that drive. And again, I think that was Wiggins that fell there. So it's a combination of things. I can't blame it on the receivers. I can't blame it on the quarterback. But to your point, I've seen Emory Jones when he's confident, and my goodness, he's good, But when he's not confident, he's not great. That's for sure. He makes some mistakes.
So another thing that's been brought up is the lack of explosive plays. Do you think we maybe got a sense of false hope after those first 2 weeks when we did see Emory hit on big plays to his receivers?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you look at what he hit to Xavier Henderson in the Eastern Kentucky game, and there was other ones as well. You're thinking, okay, and I think Corey Kiner in that game had a 50-some yard run as well. And you're thinking, okay, well, we're going to be very, very explosive. Well, that kind of slowed down big time. And then, it was brought to a head this week again in the press conference. And Coach Satterfield, talking about the lack of explosive plays. They really are lacking those, and it's kind of interesting. And it seems to me for maybe 4 or 5 years now, what the Bearcats, where they have issues, the Bengals have issues. Okay. And if you look at the Bengals, all they were talking about the last 3 or 4 weeks was their lack of being able to get the ball down the field, particularly to people like Chase, Well, we saw that kind of, they came out of their slump this past weekend. And I think Cincinnati can as well. This is a very good secondary, though. When we get to Iowa State, we'll talk a little bit more about them. It's a very good secondary. Miami's secondary was good as well, but they were unable to complete those big plays. I think BYU gave them some opportunities, although BYU was kind of playing back and knowing that these guys were explosive. They wanted to keep them in front of them, and the Bearcats were never able to really hit, with the exception of Braden Smith made a very, very nice contested catch, one of those 50-50 balls where he went up and really made a nice catch. And I don't know, you call it explosive, but I don't want to say it was around 30, 32 yards. Not a huge play, but still pretty nice. So, I mean, I think they're in a spot where they can do that. At the same time, people are trying to take that away from them. And I'm a firm believer of take what they're giving you. This intermediate and short passing game, that is where, honestly, that is where Emory Jones is really, really good. Not that he can't throw the long ball, but those 15-yard crossing routes, whether it's the tight ends, whether it's the slot receivers, whether it's the X receivers, which is Xavier Henderson or D Wiggins, those guys, those curl routes, those coming across the middle, those dig routes, those guys can make those catches. They complete the out route very well. So stay with what they're giving you. And, and I have no problem with a 17 play drive. And like you were talking about, Ryan, they're one of the top 5 in the nation in, time of possession. The problem there is they're not top 5 in scoring, which means that you're not getting across the goal line, particularly, with touchdowns in particular.
Well, I would also say that, this losing streak could be contributed to not just a lack of turnovers, but also turnovers for the Bearcats. Emory Jones, 6 interceptions over the last 4 games, but 5 in the last 3 games during this losing streak.
Right.
As a quarterback and a wide receiver, being a former wide receiver, what are some of the things you're working on in a bye week, knowing that you maybe haven't played as well and turnovers have been an issue?
Well, I mean, I think number one, you're working on the things that you were alluding to right there, was being on the same page with your receivers and having confidence and knowing what they're going to do. So you see a guy, maybe, okay, your linebackers are going like this in coverage and your receivers coming in behind them. You're knowing what that receiver is going to do, and you're throwing that ball just as he breaks around that linebacker in front of that safety, or if it's man, where the corner's on his backside. And as long as you throw the ball properly, the corner's not going to make a play on a play like that. So I think that's number one. And that kind of feeds the turnover side. It hasn't been fumbles that have killed them. It's been interceptions that have hurt them. So they're working hard to make sure they know what the receivers are doing and to make sure that Emory gets that ball into the right spot and that the receiver knows where Emory wants to throw the football as well. It's one of those things where, when you're out there, you feel it. I can tell you, and they don't really call it a curl route anymore, but when you go down maybe 12, 15 yards and you're going to break to the inside, there's 2 ways to handle that. When you turn your head and you start looking back at the quarterback and there's a linebacker right there kind of in your drop zone, you're going inside of him, okay? If that linebacker is dropping back kind of more straight behind or straight from the quarterback, well, then you're going to maybe curl up and, catch that ball to the outside of that linebacker. And that's those are the pages that those guys need to be on together. Out routes, again, they do a really good job. I will say this about Emory. One of the things that, if you want to have a criticism, the one interception against Miami where he was on the right hash mark and threw a fade or a long, deep route to the left, all the way across the field,
right.
Where the safety had literally, a month to get back there and cover that ball. And he had one of those against BYU. It wasn't quite like that. It was more from the center of the field. But he didn't look the safety off, so the safety came over and gave the corner help. That one was not an interception, but it was a knockdown where it could have been a contested catch in the end zone for a touchdown. So, he needs to make better decisions. Not every decision he makes is bad, but he's made a few bad ones, and it's cost him a little bit.
So this is a program that hasn't lost 3 straight since the first year of Luke Fickell, so 2016 or 2017.
That's correct.
Throughout the press conferences this week, we've heard a common theme from Scott Satterfield, Emory Jones, Dorian Jones, as well as Jack Dingle. The players know how close they are to maybe being 4-1 instead of 2-3. Do you find that encouraging that the players are still upbeat, even though they're in a 3-game losing streak and they know how close they are to turning things around?
Yeah, I really do. I think if they're confident in that, and I believe they are, and I will tell you right now, from living through 2017 and then where we are here 5 games into 2023, this team's a lot better than that 2017 team. Now your competition's a little better as well.
Right.
We weren't in the Big 12 back then. We were in the American Conference, and honestly, this team's a lot better than that. However, they need to figure this out. But I do agree with what you're saying. They're just a few plays away from being 4-1. So from that standpoint, yeah, they need to figure it out, but at the same time, it should give them some encouragement and some confidence moving forward.
Turning the page to Iowa State, they come in 3-3, coming off a win over TCU 27-14, and then they also, I believe they defeated. They were in the game with Oklahoma 21-20 with 6 minutes to go in the first half. Just overall first impression on what you've seen from Iowa State.
Yeah, they are the polar opposite of Cincinnati.
Yeah, I agree.
If you look at their stats, they're 103rd in offense, they're 67th in defense, and I'm just those are kind of close numbers, but I don't have those numbers in front of me. Where Cincinnati's number 5 in time of possession, number 10 in offense, in rushing offense, number 12 in total offense, number 20 in total defense. The stats are not going to blow you away with Iowa State, but there are a few stats. If you dig deep, you're going to see 3 sacks on the year with a young quarterback. So I brought this point up last night in the coaches show. If you go back, and even in Eastern Kentucky, you had a 6th-year quarterback, right? Okay. And on Pittsburgh, you had a 6th-year quarterback. Miami, you have a 5th-year cornerback who could come back for a 6th year. Oklahoma, I don't even know how many years Dylan Gabriel's been around. It's at least 5, if not 6. Yeah. And then you go to BYU, and Slovis has been around 6 years. So you look at that. I mean, that's 5 quarterbacks and maybe a total of 28 years of experience in college football. And in this year, you get Rocco Breck, who's I think going to be a very, very good quarterback, but he's young. But here's the difference. He hasn't made any mistakes. I mean, he makes some. I watched him early in the year, and then I watched a little bit of the Oklahoma game. And he's come a long way in 4 games. He really has. And if you look at what they're doing, and you want to talk, we've talked about turnovers a bunch today. They've got 2 guys in the top 6 in the Big 12 in interceptions. 1 at 4 and 1 at 2. There's a whole lot of people at 2. But at the same time, 4 is a lot when they're 6 games in. So they've actually played. They're 3-3, I think. Aren't they 3-3 coming in? 2 and 1 in the league. Yeah. So they played 6 games, but still 4 interceptions in 6 games. Pretty darn good. And who is that? That's their safety. And what does that mean? That means he's, number one, a very experienced and talented player sitting back there just watching what's going on. So all the things that we talked about, bad Emory, he can't do this week. He's got to look that safety. If it's something he knows he's coming back to D. Wiggins on the left side, he's got to be dropping back, looking to the right, and then boom, have the confidence to know that D's going to find himself open, quickly look back to the left and make that throw across the middle so that safety can't react, because that's one of the things that, as we know, turnovers can kill you. Honestly, and the muff punt added to it, but that early pick 6 at BYU, and then of course the muff punt, those are game breakers right there. I mean, that's the difference in the game, honestly. So from that perspective, what do I know about Iowa State? Not a lot. I've watched them a little bit. I do know in looking at Matt Campbell and both what he was able to do at Toledo and what he's been able to do at Iowa State, they played very, very steady football. They don't make a lot of mistakes on either side of the football. They're not explosive. They never have been. Maybe you could go back to the David Montgomery days when he was there. The Brock Purdy days, they threw the ball a little bit better or ran the ball a little bit better, but they still played the same brand of football. They're very, very methodic. They're very, very good at what they do. They don't make a lot of mistakes. So what does that mean? That means certainly this is a winnable game for the Bearcats, but they can't make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, Scott Satterfield mentioned that when you play in a league like the Big 12, where a lot of the teams are pretty evenly matched, usually the difference in the game is turnovers. The teams that won in the Big 12 this past weekend forced 13 turnovers. The teams that lost only forced 5 combined.
Right.
So with that in mind, Iowa State has a secondary. I believe they're third in the country at 10 interceptions as a team. And they're a team that likes to run a 3-3-5, which Emory Jones mentioned that he's never seen before, which is a little surprising. He's in his, 5th year? So you would think
and it's not all that different than what he faces every day. Now, there's some wrinkles. I did look at it. So, if you look at what Cincinnati runs, they run kind of something similar to that. They run more of a 3-2-6 if you look at that star position that Deshaun Pace plays. But at the same time, it's still he's really a third linebacker. But that being said, you're right. A little surprised that he hasn't run across that somewhere, in all. I mean, he's played a lot of football, so I'm surprised he hasn't seen it. However, it's still the same reads. From it looks different, and everybody does the best they can do these days to disguise the coverages or the blitz packages. So even though it might just be 3 guys up front, I'll tell you what, at BYU we saw 5 and 6 coming a lot at Emory. And he handled that pretty well. So did the offensive line. But at the same time, they're going to do what they can to disrupt him. They know that if he sits back there and has time, he can hurt him. So particularly, one of the things Emory does really, really well is when he gets out of the pocket and rolls, he can throw the ball on the run very well. So, it's not necessarily a bad thing, or even to have that call coming from the sideline that, to kind of roll him out, semi-roll him. I don't mean, all the way out to the edge, but if he gets out on the edge a little bit or can get out and run, get outside the tackle, he throws the ball very well.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with Iowa State, using a 3-3-5, is this a game where they maybe try to rely on Corey Kiner in the rush game and also try to do, we haven't seen many screens, which is a little surprising. Is this a game where we maybe see Corey out of the backfield or Montgomery or any of those guys just kind of get Emory some confidence and open up that intermediate to deep range?
Well, I mean, I think both are very, very good possibilities. One is, Cincinnati at 220 yards a game running ball. That's what they do well. They're going to continue to run the football. Matt Kiner will be the guy. And, we've seen 5 games, and we've seen Ryan Montgomery have a good game too. And obviously Emory Jones has done a nice job of he had the 100-yard game. And I think this past game at BYU, he had 93, 94. He was almost at 100.
Yeah.
So certainly the running game is going to be a big part of it. However, going back to the last statement I had about the rush, one of the things that can bust a rush, if you're putting 5-6 guys after the quarterback, a screen pass can just bust wide open. So They haven't run many of those. You're absolutely right. They really haven't been successful at all on the wide receiver screens that they've run. A lot of that is, you need to block the other guys that are out there. Need to do a little bit better job of blocking. But from the running back standpoint, I wouldn't be shocked to see guys like Corey Kiner or even Ryan Montgomery, who's a really, really good pass receiver out of the backfield.
We've seen Shimon Taylor kind of break out the last couple of weeks. Obviously, a great game at BYU, the 2-point conversion against Miami to kind of get him going. How important is it to have a guy like him to open things up even more within the offense?
Yeah, no doubt about it. And people are going to start looking at him. And let's just say, okay, early in the game here in the Iowa State game, he can catch a couple of passes, whether it's over the middle, whether it's out in the flat, just whatever routes that he's running, that's going to put more eyes on him. And that's going to open things up for Henderson and Wiggins and Braden Smith and those guys. And not to mention the running game alone. All of a sudden, he's able to make a few catches. You're not sending that 6 guy. You're only sending 5 guys or 4 guys. You're sending the 3 down linemen that you have, that Iowa State has, and maybe an offside Mike linebacker, not Mike linebacker, a Will linebacker, or something like that. You're only sending 4. And what that does then is all of a sudden that opens up your running game. Yeah, maybe you don't gain 70 yards on the play, but you're picking up 12, 15, 20 yards on those running plays, which we've seen the Bearcats do frequently this year.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about the offense through the first 5 weeks, just overall impression of the defense. I think the big thing with the defense so far, and you mentioned it earlier, is just the inopportune penalties that we've seen on third down that have extended drives for the opposing team. What has been your grade or just overall impression on the defense through the first 5 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, they're top 20 in the nation. And they're not giving up a ton of points. They've given up more than they should, particularly they as bad as the UC offense has performed in the red zone, the defense is just a hair above that. They've given up some red zone scores that they shouldn't have, but they're still top 20 in the nation. Much like the offense, it's moved the ball up and down the field. So, I mean, if I was to give them a grade, I'd give them maybe a B-. They played well. They really have. The secondary, I think all in all has done a pretty good job. I think Justin Harris, who got picked on early in the year, particularly in the Pittsburgh game, has really made a nice comeback and done some nice things. The safeties have played well. The linebackers, all 3 of them, Dorian Jones, Dingle, and Pace, I think have played really, really well. Obviously, the front 3 are getting double teamed a lot. Phillips, Corleone, and Briggs. Those guys are getting double teamed a lot, but that's allowing the linebackers to play a little bit more free. What I haven't seen, which, what I'd like to see is, a little bit more pressure up front and forcing an errant throw and an interception. That would be great. Pick 6. That hasn't happened yet. Brian Threats has 2 interceptions, so that's not bad. He's tied for second in the league with about 30 guys, maybe not 30, but 20. And that's fine. 2 interceptions is great, but you'd like to see some of the other guys get in the action too, and particularly a pick 6 would be great. Something where quarterback makes a desperate throw as he's being hit by Corleone, and somebody's able to jump the route and pick one of those and take it back the distance.
Yeah, I definitely think this is a game where third down is going to be crucial for both teams. Cincinnati's right around 45% successful rate on third down. But you look at Iowa State, and they're, I think, 200th in the country in terms of third down conversions. So it'll definitely, one thing I'm going to be watching is, the type of pressure that Brian Brown dials up on third down, especially with a young quarterback, to try to get some of those turnovers that you're alluding to. Do you view this game as maybe a must-win if the Bearcats want to make a bowl game?
So I was going to go back to the Bengals again and the comment that they made last week that this is a must-win, and it really is. Now, again, things can change. There's nobody on the schedule left that's unbeatable. There's going to be some teams that are tougher, but you look at Baylor coming in next week; they're struggling. Oklahoma State's been up and down, and not to mention down the stretch you got UCF who just got drilled. West Virginia might be the surprise team of the Big 12 right now, other than Oklahoma, and we knew Oklahoma was going to be good. West Virginia picked to finish last, is actually playing really well, sitting at 4-1. But there's a lot of football to play, so you don't know. But point being is you can win every one of these games. However, there's certain things that make you think that you might lose 1 or 2. So this is one at home and Baylor, and I throw them both into the same category. I'm not going to worry about Baylor right now. Let's worry about Iowa State. This is a winnable game, and I think it's, when I say a must-win, it's not a must-win for the program, but if you want to go to a bowl game this year, it is a must-win. I really do believe that.
I think it's interesting in terms of, fan perspective. Cincinnati, whether Luke Fickell was here or Scott Satterfield, everyone knew this was going to be a transition year, given, the graduations, the transfers, the transfer portal, who was coming in. you look at a team like UCF, who was, projected to be the best of the newcomers with a, experienced coach, a lot of guys returning, and they're sitting at 0-3 in the league. And as you mentioned, just got drilled. Do you think that, I guess, fans should maybe temper their expectations and keep things in perspective and remember that, hey, this is a transition year regardless? Or is it just one of those things where the standard's been set and that's what we all need to go by?
Well, I think it's both. You're absolutely right. The standard has been set. I mean, there's probably people complaining down in Athens, Georgia, that Kentucky scored 17 points on the Bulldogs last weekend. So that's the world we live in today. The Twitter world or whatever, the social media world. And I get on some of those Bearcat Facebook pages and I read one or two comments and I'm done with this. Yeah. But no offense to those people, but the people that really know football, they're going to look at it the way you just described it. This is a transition year. I feel really good about the future. I love the Big 12 so far, even though, we haven't experienced that much. I'm going to go back to your Oklahoma State trip. I'm looking forward to that because honestly, again, Provo, Utah is gorgeous, but I haven't kind of accepted them into the fold of the Big 12 yet, even though you know what I mean? I'm talking about the Oklahoma States, the Texas Techs, we're going to lose Oklahoma and Texas, but whatever, the old school, the Iowa States, those kind of schools, the Big 12 schools that were there. So from that perspective, I love it. And I also like the fact that it's a very even league. It really is. I mean, I don't think anybody thought Kansas was going to beat UCF and Orlando the way that they did. And I don't think anybody thought that University of South Alabama was going to beat Oklahoma State by 21 points in Stillwater. So I mean, from good, bad standpoint, anybody can win any week. But back to the original point, this is a game that I think the Bearcats need to win. They really do.
So looking back at, some of the issues that we've seen mentioned from the first 5 weeks, some of your answers are probably going to be similar. What do you think are the keys for this team moving forward in terms of having success on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of started it the right way. I mean, I think turnovers, you have to not less takeaways, a few more turnovers. You don't have to, have 6 interceptions a game, but 1 or 2 in a fumble recovery and not give up, 1 pick, quarterbacks are going to make wrong decisions. Somebody's going to make a great play. I mean, you have to understand those guys on the other side are on scholarship as well. So they make very good plays sometimes, but you got to win the turnover battle, whatever that is. And it sounds simple, but that red zone problem is a killer right now. I mean, it's hurting because it changes the whole complexity of the game. If, I know the Bearcats at BYU were able to come back and actually came down to an onside kick. Chances were slim that if they recovered that, they could have scored. But they didn't have to be in that position to where they get a late score and go for an onside kick. If they would have been better in the red zone, and Miami's probably even a better example, it wouldn't have come down to a block kick if they were better in the red zone. So, maybe the Oklahoma game is still a nip and tuck down to the wire thing, but maybe Oklahoma pulls ahead. You can give it that one. That's a pretty good football team. But getting better in the red zone, and the numbers you don't have to blow the numbers out of the water, but you've got to be better than you are right now once you get inside that 20-yard line.
Scott Satterfield mentioned a lot of self-scouting over this bye week. One thing that I've kind of thought about is I don't know that they're getting Xavier Henderson in enough one-on-one situations. So if you go back and look over during the losing streak, when they put Xavier Henderson in one-on-one situations, especially on the field side, he's almost unguardable just because of his speed, his length, his catch radius. Am I seeing things correctly and have the right mindset that they're maybe not utilizing Xavier in enough one-on-one situations?
Well, I mean, I think they're trying to use him, and you're right. They have the ability. I mean, you make the play call, so you fair catch a punt. Okay, you're at your 25-yard line. You're on your right hash mark. Okay, it's obvious the field side is going to be to the left side. You're on the right hash. You can bring three guys into the boundary, into the short side of the field, and you can put Xavier out there, and they do that quite a bit, but. I don't know that he's targeted all the time that he's out there. And I don't know enough about, Coach Satterfield's play calling, or whether it's one of those things where, Emory has the ability to check off at any time to a run. And, but at the same time, he also has the ability, if a run's called, to go, to make a call to get the ball out to Xavier. No question, he's a weapon. You hit right on everything that he has. He has the height. He has the speed. He's long. He has that length to be able to go up and make a contested catch. So even though he's well ahead of all the other receivers in number of catches, he's certainly a guy that they can utilize more.
Well, Jan, this has been a lot of fun. I think the one thing I do want to hit on, just because I'm interested in your take, we saw Coach Satterfield mention we don't have explosive running backs without the context of the comment being mentioned with it. Just your thoughts on that comment, because to be honest, if you look at the stats, nothing he said was wrong. Yeah, but I was just curious to get your take on that comment.
Yeah, well, and I did see it was used on television broadcasts yesterday, other websites. No, I think he just chose the wrong words. I think he might have should have said, I don't have a 4-3 running back that can take the ball 90 yards. Okay. Explosive. He has 3 explosive ones, 4, mm-hmm. if you want to include Ethan Wright in there and even Stephen Bird. Even he hasn't played much, but a guy like Corey Kiner is very explosive. But to Coach Satterfield's point, he's not a 4-3 guy. He's not a Jerome Ford who could take the ball 80 yards. That's not knocking those guys at all. And, if you watch the whole comment, he did come back on it later and say, I love my guys. I love my running backs. And they can always get you that first down or that 15-yard, 20-yard gain. I think he would have, loved to have had that back and say it in a different way. I have 220 yards a game. Now, again, your quarterback runs the ball a bunch too. But, Corey Kiner's he's had 200-yard games, came close again. He didn't carry the ball a lot at the end of the BYU game, the fourth quarter. He had potential to go to, over 100 yards there as well, came close. So I feel good with Corey in there. I love Ryan Montgomery. I hope he's healthy to play this week. I hope that, the off week really helped him get back on the field. And so from that perspective, Miles Montgomery's good too. So I don't have a problem with the running backs. They are not the problem with this team right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was just, I feel that a lot of people maybe took that comment out of context and didn't look at the entire comment. So I just
it's like anything. If you single out, 10 words and that's all you put is the clip, people are going to take it for what it is. Well,
right.
The way that it led into it, and maybe he should have used some other wording, but then he did come back later and, and try to not try, but he corrected himself. And quite honestly, I think exactly what you said, Ryan, was that, what he said wasn't untrue. At the same time, he wasn't criticizing his running back room by any means.
Right. Yeah. I think the better wording would have been, we haven't had explosive plays from our running backs. Yeah.
And
when he continued the comment, he mentioned on explosive plays that the quarterbacks and wide receivers have missed, either from bad reads, overthrows, drops. So I think it was just one of those things where people were maybe looking for a reason to complain because the Bearcats are on a 3-game losing streak.
Sure.
And that was the headline they chose to run with heading into this week.
No question about it. And back to the to your point from 10 minutes ago, people got spoiled with 13-0 and whatever, and 12-2 and things like that, or 12, or 11-2. It's hard. It's hard to lose. It's no fun. But again, back to 2017 at 4-8, and honestly should have been 2-10 that year. I've never seen a team turn around from that 4-8 team in 17 to what they became in 18. And this team is a lot better right now than that 2017 team. So,
yeah,
all is not bleak by any means.
Yeah, the best hope is win the games you should win down the stretch, and maybe steal one on the road against West Virginia, or defend your home turf against Kansas.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
Another season.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, if you look at your road games, none of them are going to be easy. But both Oklahoma State, West Virginia, and Houston are all 3 winnable games on the road. All of your home games, maybe Kansas is right now looks to me like they're kind of moving towards that 3rd spot in the league, maybe even ahead of Texas. But there's a lot of football to play. Somebody else can beat them, but they looked really good last week against UCF. I didn't see much of the game. I saw enough of them to say they're pretty scary.
Yeah, Jalen Daniels is really good.
He is. The good part is they're coming in here.
Right. Yeah. I was telling someone else the same thing. I'm glad they get Kansas at home, because
that's not one I'd want to play on the road. Right.
Yeah. So. Well, Jim, man, this has been fun. It's always a good time having you on, talking some ball. I love your perspective on things. We'll end things, and we're right around 45 minutes. It's been great.
Right. And thanks for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Look forward to seeing you Saturday.
Yep. I'll see you Saturday. Okay, later.